Welcome. Thank you all for coming. My name is Peter Berkowitz. I'm a senior fellow at the Hoover Institution of Stanford University. We're delighted that you could all come for this special event to our well-fortified outpost here inside the Beltway. We're especially delighted to have here Israel's ambassador to the United States, Ambassador Ron Dermer. Thank you for coming. If you'll indulge me for a moment, I'd like to say to our distinguished guests, the Honorable Natan Sharansky and the Honorable Yuli Edelstein, in the language of their country, Bruchim Habayim, Kavod Gadol, Mamash Gadol, Bishvil Machon Hoover le'erech etchem kan b'misodenu.
Then we switch into Hebrew.
Which is to say, it's a real honor for the Hoover Institution to host two such remarkable men. Speaker of the Knesset in Israel, Yuli Edelstein, and the chair of the Jewish Agency, Natan Sharansky. They are very remarkable men. They share a kind of common history. Both were born in the Soviet Union, in what is now, at least for the time being, the Ukraine. Both as young men ran afoul of Soviet totalitarianism. Mr. Sharansky's crime was advocating for human rights and for seeking a visa to emigrate to the State of Israel. For these crimes, he served 8 years, from 1978 to 1986.
9 years, but who counts?
In the Soviet gulags. Yuli Edelstein's crime was to learn Hebrew as a young man, and to teach Hebrew as a young man, and to seek a visa to the State of Israel. He served, I believe, was imprisoned in the gulags from 1983 to 1985. In 1986, Natan Sharansky won release and emigrated to Israel. In 1987, I believe, Yuli Edelstein followed. In the mid-90s, they joined forces and they formed a political party, Yisrael Ba'aliyah, and a main purpose of this political party was to protect the interests of new immigrants to Israel. Both, I believe, were elected to the Knesset in 1996. Since 1996, I think Yuli Edelstein has served almost continuously to the present day. He served in a variety of ministerial positions, and 2 years ago he became Speaker of the Knesset. Natan Sharansky served until 2005. 2009 became head of the Jewish Agency. He's also the author of 3 books. One, Fear No Evil, a memoir published in 1988, translated into at least 9 languages, I think. A book, The Case for Democracy, from 2004, which President Bush was seen reading and studying, and a recent book of 2008, Defending Identity. So you can see from their experience, remarkable men. We're delighted to have them here for a panel discussion about Israel, Middle East, and democratic leadership. We're going to operate in this way. I'm going to begin with a few easy softball questions for our distinguished visitors. Once I move through the easy questions, we'll turn to you, the audience, for the hard, probing, shrewd questions. So, without further ado, let me begin with a question that is probably on everybody's minds. In about 6 weeks, Israeli voters are going to go to the voting booths for the 3rd time in 6 years for parliamentary elections. Israel faces some very, very significant challenges. There's rising inequality, cost of living is increasing. There's a question of integrating the Arab minority, integrating a substantial Jewish minority, the ultra-Orthodox. There's a conflict, the protracted conflict with the Palestinians, instability on all of Israel's borders, Lebanon, Syria, Jordan, Egypt, Sinai Peninsula. Iran is now in the 15th month of 6-month interim negotiations about its nuclear program. Given all of these challenges, as Israel approaches its 67th birthday. How do you assess the state of freedom and democracy in Israel? Mr. Speaker?
Well, first of all, the real answer should take, I guess, about 5 hours. We will do that. But in short, I disagree with some basic assumptions presented in your Knesset. I think that the challenges are there. You're absolutely right. I wouldn't take raising inequality as one of the basic assumptions. I think that according to all the statistics, we are facing the opposite process right now. Income-wise and on other issues, peripheria center-wise. The state of democracy, I can give you the official Mr. Speaker's answer. Everything's fine. We have definitely the best and the most representative, I think, parliament in the world, and I mean it. There's not a single minority in Israel that is not represented in the parliament. In terms of the practical state of things, I think it's a little bit more complicated, especially vis-a-vis the Arab minority. They are in an impossible situation because one of their leaders once upon a time put it, he said, I'm in a terrible situation, my country is at war with my people. And I think that it's a real challenge. It's not a minority in the regular sense of the word. Many of them, fortunately, unfortunately, this is already judgmental, but believe that we don't belong there and it's their country. So it's not minority, it's not the Jewish minority in Great Britain. It's totally different. And this is a big challenge. This is a big challenge because I, for one, once again, I guess it's the only parliament in the world, I have an Arab faction that would never enter the plenary session if there is any state activity going on. Like, for example, if President Obama would be addressing the Knesset, there's a faction that would never appear. President Hollande of France visited Abbas, Abu Mazen, and then came to the Knesset. None of them was present because he was on a state visit to Israel. So this is they would never join, obviously, any parliamentarian delegation, whatever. So this is a big challenge. How do we find ways to really integrate and have a constant dialogue with the Arab minority? They have a different type of leadership, but unfortunately, mostly on the municipal level. On the Knesset level, I think that I still recall, I guess Natan would recall too, the days when you could legislate together with Arab MKs social things or green things or something. It's not there anymore. You could, I had the personal experience of going to the March of the Living to the concentration camps in Auschwitz with an Arab MK as part of the delegation. It's not there anymore. So I think that this is a real challenge, and it goes far beyond, as some present, to give more budget to this or that village. It's a real intellectual challenge too, I guess.
Well, where does one begin to think about it? Legislative steps, educational?
No, it's not about legislation. I think it's education, it's projects. No one's interested in projects of coexistence. All those who support projects in this level are interested in all kinds of organizations going to the Supreme Court to fight for the land or something of the kind, not in coexistence projects, which is very sad. And I think it's not about legislation. It's about constant dialogue. It's about, as I've said, alternative leadership, promoting things, and yes, budgets, but it's a long and bumpy road. And I think that part of it is, by the way, something that is very unpopular, is fighting those who are not moving in the same direction. And we had that experience now in the outgoing Knesset with some MKs. Well, I can put it in a politically correct manner, say on both sides, but never mind. To fight those who are not part of the process, are ruining the process. I think it's part of the process.
Thank you, Mr. Sharansky. Freedom and democracy in Israel today.
To make life even more difficult, Yuli spoke about some Arab members of parliament who don't fully recognize or don't recognize the state. We also have some Jewish members of the Knesset who will never agree to be ministers in the government. They will agree to be deputy ministers and to have access to the budgets, but they will not agree to be ministers because they don't want to have political responsibility for the existence of Jewish, not religious state, but they do want to enjoy financial opportunities that the state creates. And that's, by the way, I'm not criticizing them. I'm simply saying that Jewish people came did something absolutely impossible. There is nothing to compare. After 2,000 years, being kept only by religion and by national idea and anti-Semitism, to create their own state, to create and to bring so many different people who understand their Jewishness very differently, from those who don't recognize the state and to those for whom state is the only answer to anti-Semitism and the shelter and so on. And to keep all them together and to have more successful economy than practically almost every economy of the free world. And to have, in spite of all these big restrictions that Yuli is speaking, to be such an extreme democracy which doesn't permit any restriction. In fact, even our enemies in some respectable newspapers in the United States of America are writing that such a permissiveness in having opposite political views and attacking one another as exists in the Knesset and in the press, that doesn't exist practically in any other place. So I believe it's simply a miracle. It's unique success. It's nothing to compare with because nothing like this exists. And the fact that there are problems, of course there are problems and there will be problems, and the only way to deal with them is to go ahead, keeping these restrictions. We want to be a Jewish state, we want to be uncompromising democracy, we want to be successful in the economy, we want to include those Jews who are not ready to sit in the government, to be in the Knesset, we want to include those Arabs who are not ready to recognize us to be in the Knesset, and to continue.
So as long as we continue to hear a lively discussion, not to say almost intellectual fisticuffs about Israel's liberal, democratic, and Jewish, we know things are okay.
Why not to say we have intellectual fist struggles every minute?
Yes.
Every minute. That's the only way of Jewish survival. I think we cannot survive differently. I often remind people that Soviet Jewry movement, and it's very appropriate to remind about it in Washington and in America, because that was extremely successful, extremely powerful movement of American Jews and American congressmen who didn't agree with the American president and who were our big supporters. But that's the movement which consisted of Jews who every minute were fighting one another. There were dozens of different Jewish organizations who said that the others are the traitors, and only they are having the real fight. And we all together, all these different organizations, fought one battle and won one battle, fighting with one another. So that's what our Jewish way. We have great idea which unites us, and great faith which unites us, and great history which unites us. And we have 1,000 questions every day which disunite us. That's okay.
So the state of freedom and democracy is in Israel is good, and the sign of it is the tremendous struggles among the different factions in Israel. Let me ask you a question about Palestinian leadership. What Israel has been in a protracted conflict with the Palestinians for decades, in a sense, since before Israel's birth. What are the prospects in the coming years, given the current makeup of Palestinian leadership?
First of all, the term leadership is very problematic, because when we speak about leadership in Israel, who are the people who express the deep desires of their citizens and who try to meet their expectations in order to be elected? So the leaders are people who depend in their activity on the needs of their people. Those who use this dependence in the right way, they have the chance to say. When you're speaking about the leaders, Palestinian leaders, they don't depend on their people. Their people depend on them. So Abu Mazen is not now a leader because he cannot control now his people. Now he his survival depends on the power of Israel Defense Forces. So he is Keilu, as if he's a leader. The leader in the Palestinian Authority is the one who can control his people, like every other dictator. And our problem is that we pretend that they are real leaders, and as a result, we pretend that it's real negotiations in order to make some people happy. But the real negotiation can be only between the people who have their people between them, and they depend on their people. That's my feeling. Yuli, what do you think?
I think yes. In terms of the process, I defined it in our Regional meeting that we built a very nice house 20 years ago, starting with the roof, and obviously it collapsed.
Yeah.
There was no,
Yeah.
there were no walls, no fundament, nothing, and I totally agree with Natan that any other attempt to find two courageous leaders that will shake hands and bring peace to our area is such nonsense that I even don't know how to address it. We can, though, start building cooperation. I do believe it. I think that, to all those who are in this business of boycotting things, many of my colleagues and counterparts all around Europe and other places, I always say to them that in any industrial zone in Judea and Samaria, and we have a few, there is more peace than in any signed agreement. Because people work together, they cooperate. And I remember a very senior broadcaster from this country, mind you, pro-Israel, not his first visit to Israel, and I took him on a tour of foreign journalists organized by my previous office, the Ministry of Public Diplomacy, and I could meet them only for lunch somewhere. So they were touring for a couple of hours. I joined them for lunch. The guy is running in my direction saying, Minister, thank you so much. We visited the industrial zone in Barkan. I said, that's nice. You can't imagine, Minister. We saw Jews and Arabs working together. I said, really? Mind you, not his first visit and very pro-Israel. He said, yes, and you know what some Palestinians said to us? They were the bosses. Something that I even couldn't get myself excited, because for us this is the day-to-day reality, and for a visitor it looks like, how come this thing is happening? So this is definitely just one of the, and not to sound over-optimistic, from time to time there's a terror attack, then this whole thing goes down the drain, then we help to rebuild it once again, and at the same time I think that we have a chance to start building cooperation. It's very unfortunate. Parliaments can do that. I do believe in it, because at least we as speakers and members of parliament are not expected to immediately sign agreements and decide what happens with Jerusalem, what happens with Jewish communities, what happens with the borders, and so on and so forth. So we can really work on green energy and agriculture and business, all these things. But it's a very long process, and it will, in the end, still depend on what Natan was addressing, when there will be a real partner, elected leadership on the other side. But in the meanwhile, at least, there is not much negative about this process. Basically, I even don't have to work for them, they don't have to work for me. I want them to work for their constituency, I will work for mine.
I want to use simply, Yuli gave a great example about industrial zones. The Barkan industrial zone and a number of others, I had the privilege to build as a Minister of Industry and Trade. And I have to say that the moment Palestinian Authority, not Palestinian, or Palestinians and one another get control of it, the first thing which they do, they destroy it. Karni was the biggest industrial zone which we, with American money and with support, opened there. There was American, I think,
By the Gaza Strip.
The Gaza Strip. It created tens of thousands of jobs. American minister, that was Stuart Eisenstein, then was myself and Palestinian Dabil Shad, official opened everything. The moment it was under their control, the first thing, it was destroyed fully. So it's about who is the real leader. In fact, the industrialists, Palestinian industrialists, who enjoyed from this, they are much more our partner. They are much more interested in this partnership than the political leaders who are interested to destroy it.
I have friends who live on Kibbutz Niram, which is a
Oh, yeah,
kibbutz
well,
on the border
yeah, of course.
with Gaza, and they've been dreaming of industrial parks along that borders for, as you know, you're
Yeah,
more than
yeah.
25 years. So one follow-up question on this. So building not starting with the roof, but from the ground up, here are there additional steps that the government can take where it's possible to promote commerce between Israel and Palestinians, at least in the West Bank today? Is this on the boards, on the table for discussion?
Yes, but I guess, as I've said, the more private initiatives we see there, and the more parliamentarian cooperation we see there, the better, because governments are still expected to come with practical results. Two ministers meet, the press is outside with cameras on, they want to see what was signed and who said what and whatever. We can really, if we really want to build, we shouldn't expect immediate results. It will be a process. And you know what? We already had it several times, but each time, as I've said, there are problems. There's, I managed after so many efforts with a couple of international parliamentary organizations to create a seminar on water resources that was supposed to take place in Jordan on the Jordanian side of the Dead Sea. Jordanians, Palestinians, Israelis, parliamentarians, and experts brought by International Parliamentarian Union. Instead of inspecting us all the time and checking the situation with the human rights, they decided to do something serious, and they organized all these international experts there. Well, a week before we had to meet, there was the terrible kidnapping of the 3 kids in Gush Etzion, and the 3 sides. There was even not like one side yes, one side no. The 3 sides immediately said, this is the wrongest possible time to start a process like that. So each time the terrorism interferes, the bad guys interfere, but there's no other way. I don't see any other way.
Let's expand the scope. In 2011, uprising shook the Arab world. Successful efforts to oust dictators. And there was, in some quarters, a lot of hope about an outbreak of democracy in the Middle East. Now, 4 years later, we seem to be seeing the rise of Islamic extremism, and not least on all of your borders. Are there any prospects, as you view the situation, for an outbreak of democracy in the greater Middle East?
That's within his
jurisdiction.
Yes, he's the expert.
Yeah. First of all, it's nice to hear that people were very optimistic about Arab Spring. The Western leaders, until the day when Arab Spring started, didn't believe that it would happen and did their best to strengthen dictators who were overthrown. And you can look what your leaders were saying 1 week before Mubarak was about Mubarak, what they were saying 1 week before Assad started the war killing, about reformists, about partner, about the great champions of peace and so on. So they didn't believe in that. Suddenly they were betrayed. Arab people don't like these dictators. But if you look what dissidents, democratic dissidents of Egypt, of Syria, of Iran were saying, they were expecting it. They felt it. They knew that it will happen. Now, the free world was given great opportunity to support these dissidents, to embrace these dissidents. But the free world really was doing, and what I'm sorry to say, American administration is doing, it's looking for the next set of dictators whom they can support. They are dying to have a reliable partner in Iran. They are ready to accept Assad because that is our only hope against ISIS. Of course, the leader of Sisi, the leader of Egypt, is our biggest hope for the democratic future of the world. Of course, this war they are allies, exactly as Stalin was the ally of Churchill and Roosevelt, of course, until 1943. But then there was 1945 when you had to understand it's no more an ally. As long as the free world will continue seeing dictators as the only partner for the future democracy, there will be no democracy.
Was it a mistake in 2009 for the United States not to support the Iranians who were
No,
out
it was
in the
not a
streets?
mistake, it was a betrayal.
Well, I have to stick to political correctness with all the difficulty, but I would take a different angle on that. First of all, I can't say I was happy that whole thing happened because it brought us right now what is happening on our border and ISIS and whatever, but it was inevitable. It was like, as Natan is rightly saying, you can't expect from any nation to live under dictatorships forever. At some stage it explodes. Having said that, I still remember, as opposed to my friend here, I'm such a poor writer. Not only that I don't write books, I even don't write articles. I guess I did it 2 or 3 times in my life. When the jerk in the New York Times wrote that we are on the wrong side of history and Bibi should understand and we are missing and whatever, I wrote such an angry article that I was even hesitating whether to send it to the New York Times to publish. In the end I did, but it went via the consulate. So the consul said, Minister, wouldn't you mind if I change certain things in the article? I said, okay, go for it. Even the adopted version was not published. Then I went back to the original version and published it in a different American newspaper because I was just mad. People who call themselves, journalists, so I try to analyze things to expect that things like that, that dictatorship falls and immediately there is democracy. Where did they see that ever? Look at Eastern Europe. Look at the former Soviet Union. There's common denominator to all those countries that have more or less democratic regimes today. They had been democracies before World War II. No other example is around. So I think that as I've said, there was an inevitable change. We are starting, the Middle East, let's say, is starting a very long and difficult process. In some countries, in the end, there will be democratic regimes. In some, unfortunately, as Natan was suggesting, there will be good dictators, bad dictators, in between dictators, but still dictators. And the process is very dangerous for us. But look at Syria, the things that are happening in the north. The first thing I do when I come back, actually, I go on some tour of the northern border with the military to see things happening there. So it's a dangerous process, but once again, I'll use the same word. The process is inevitable, and in the end, I hope with the right behavior and the right action of several powers around the world, not us. We can't do much. We have the touch of death in all of these countries, even if we try to interfere. But if the world, for a change, does something right, probably there's hope for some of these countries. Along the way, 10 years, 15 years, 20 years, I don't know.
But Israel has no real role to play in the promotion of freedom and democracy in the greater Middle East.
Not at this stage.
Israel, first of all, many Israeli leaders, as other leaders of the free world, are quite rather cynical about the opportunity of real democracy. And as Ariel Sharon told me about that book that you mentioned, The Case of Democracy, he said, good, Natan, that you convinced Bush in things which don't exist. It's good in the ground floor of the KGB to dream about democracy in the Middle East, but it's not serious. So I'd like them to be a little bit less cynical. But on the other hand, Israeli leaders and Israel, they have to fight every day for their existence. So for us, really, we have to think how to make sure that tomorrow we will not be destroyed. America has the luxury to think how to build the process for the next 20, 30, 40 years, and frankly, we have very little leverage. Practically, almost every democratic dissident that I know in the Middle East, and I know many of them, feels himself deeply betrayed by the West. As a rule, when they speak about it, they don't include Israeli leaders, not because they feel that they are more loyal to their rights, but simply because they really feel that Israel doesn't have real leverage. America has, the West has.
I want to come back to America, our opportunities and our responsibilities, but I want to work through the West slowly and stop in Europe first. We see it seems a rising tide of anti-Semitism in France, in other European countries. What should European leaders do? Is there something in that arena for Israel to do?
Well, I am coming actually from all these things connected, obviously, to International Holocaust Memorial Day, January 27. I was in a big event in Prague with 22 of my counterparts from around Europe and some heads of states there. I'm not very optimistic. I mean, many of my counterparts were right on the message. You know, they understand the danger, they want to fight it, but I'm not very optimistic for a number of reasons. One is, the main one is, in Israel, we are now on the election campaign, as you know, as you mentioned, and one of the main criteria for any candidate for the prime minister is, does he know how to deal with terrorism? Will he bring security to his people? So on and so on. Which is sad, but this is part of our life for the last 67 years at least, and even before the state was officially created. That's not the case in Europe. None of the European leaders I know had any military experience, you know, combating terrorism experience. So I don't see how immediately a leader like that does all the right things, where even we, with all our experience and whatever, and we are not always, like, you know, able to do the right thing in the right time. This is point number one. Point number two, it's a hard decision for many European countries, but it's a decision, you know, not to try to understand everything. You know, I remember a senior military official, even not an elected official, in London, talking to us in a closed seminar. By the way, we were there together with some Palestinian parliamentarians several years ago. And this military guy, high-ranking, explains more or less to us that you can't combat terrorism. You have to understand the roots of terrorism. This is the only way. So, you know, as I've said, I have to be politically correct, but I still couldn't resist the temptation. I said, if he would have to confront Baader Meinhof, what kind of roots exactly he would find and what exactly he would do, you know, would advise political leadership to do in order to get rid of the motivation of these Baader Meinhof guys. He didn't have a good answer. He smiled politely at me, thinking that I'm a total idiot. But I think that in terms of that, you know, Europe is not in a very good place. Though, as I've said, I do have to admit all the declarations against anti-Semitism, combating anti-Semitism were there, and all the right words have been said. But in practical terms, you know, after that terrible attack in Paris, I was asked whether I appreciate the reaction of the French government, and I said quite honestly that I very much appreciated the reaction of the French government. And my only problem was that I remember myself saying, after what happened in Toulouse, that I really appreciate the very proper reaction of the French government. So,
Mr. Sharansky.
Well, I think the situation is much worse than Yuli describes. Because of what Yuli says, I'm sorry, Yuli says, in fact, they don't have our experience with fighting terror. First of all, experience is something that you are learning, getting, and they're training now, and I have to say, French government now does a lot to protect security of Jewish communities and so on. It doesn't help, it will not help. Because the guy said to you, you have to look into the roots of terror. roots of terror are in the roots of ideology of postmodernism of Europe. Europe decided dozens of years ago that all the cultures are equal, and whether they recognize human rights, not recognize, we have to give them all citizenship. And suddenly there are millions in France, there are maybe 10 million of people from whom 7 at least have citizenship, who don't accept the rules of democratic society, and they were not asked to accept it. And now there are schools which don't teach democracy, and there are mosques who incite. And so, if you look at the Jew in France, and I of course now spent these last 3 years a lot in France, because with every year the number of Jews who want to come to us doubles, and we have a flood. Started 2 years ago 1,800, last year 3,300, 2014 7,000, this year probably will be 15,000, and we are increasing our activity every day there, France. But what, on one hand, Jew feels there is suddenly a big house of Islamic Europe. Not all of them, most of them are loyal French citizens, but there is a lot of violence and threat coming from there. And the rabbis for 12 years already in France say to children, don't go with kippah in the street. In Moscow, nobody will say to child, don't go with kippah in the street. In Paris, it's already for 12 years. So, on one hand, there is a feeling of insecurity. On the other hand, there is huge house of liberal France. That's the house of Jews. That's the house that they built, and which hates Israel. And they hear every day there on the intellectual level. It said that who needs national state, Jewish national state? Why are you Jews leaving Europe and go to the East to create there some other culture? You are part of us. You have to come back. Who needs this? That's on intellectual level. On more primitive level, Israel is fighting their wars. We are all for peace. We want peace. We finally understood in Europe that we can live without wars. And they have wars, and we have to suffer for this. So Jews, well, those who want to assimilate, they can assimilate. But those who don't, Israel is very important for them. That's the only thing which keeps them Jewishly. And in their house, in this liberal France, they feel that all their colleagues, all those who live in this house, hate Israel, which is so dear to them. So they're really caught between Islamic fundamentalism, which was permitted to conquer a big part of European society, and liberal Europe, which of course can send what they're doing now. They're sending soldiers to guard the Jewish children in the kindergarten. What I saw by my own eyes, the shock of those parents who took their children to the kindergarten, which is guarded by the soldiers. So the French government is very good in sending into 200 schools and kindergartens now the army. That doesn't mean that it will solve the problem of Jews in Europe. No, it doesn't mean that the hatred in the mosques and the schools will be stopped. So that is the root. It's not the root that probably he thought, but that's the real root. And that's why I believe that if Europe suddenly will not make some basic change, ideological change, and will start fighting against this conquering by the other culture, there is no future for Jews in Europe. But as Alan Finkielkraut, French philosopher, told me, that he's afraid there is no future for Europe in Europe. Then I showed him that there will be always place for Europe in Israel, for sure.
It's striking, as you all know, you can't go to a cafe or a pub or a restaurant or a street corner in Tel Aviv without hearing French.
Oh, yes,
it's everywhere. Let me ask you one more question before we turn to the audience. Picks up on your remarks, Mr. Sharansky, about missed opportunities by America in the West in 2009, 2010, 2011. But it's now February 2015. Are there opportunities for the West led by the United States in the Middle East? Are there responsibilities for the West led by the United States in the Middle East now, today?
First of all, you said led by the United States. If President of the United States doesn't want to lead, how you can be led by the United States? So is there a chance that America will lead the free world? I hope. That's great hope for the free world. But for this, America has to decide that it wants to lead. Okay?
Thank you.
Okay.
Mr. Edelstein.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a very interesting question.
Other questions?
Okay, he has to be politically
Yeah.
correct. So don't touch me.
You've got an election coming up.
No. We need speaker who is above all critics.
I understand.
Okay.
We're ready if you like questions from the audience.
Yeah.
Please. Just a moment, a microphone is coming your way.
And could people identify themselves?
Sure. My name's Cody. I'm a freshman at the George Washington University, a couple blocks away. Assuming that I guess, murdered prosecutor Nisman was right, that Argentina complied with Iran for the bombing of the Jewish community in Buenos Aires, what action would Israel take?
First of all, I have to correct you. As you said, assuming that he was right, that Iran was involved. It's not a question. Iran was involved. It's known already. He was stating that Argentinian government and president of Argentina tried
Cover it up.
to how to say it?
To cover it
to
up.
cover it up. That was it. Because the fact that Iran is involved, it's already proved by Argentinians, and it's known by Israel intelligence very well. Yeah, sorry.
No, we can't take any specific action except for expressing our opinion, but the sad part of it is, and it's about, I guess, not covering up things. Every terror attack against Israelis in the last, I guess, 10 years had, to use the same term, Iranian roots. When I said that to my colleagues in one of the European parliaments, they nearly walked out on me because you can't even say such an irresponsible thing. You don't have any proof, and it can't be like that. For one of my numerous sins, I had the privilege of chairing the Committee on Defense and Foreign Affairs in the Knesset for several months. So I can tell you, unfortunately, first person singular, that this is true. Every terror attack had in this or that way, in Bulgaria, in Thailand, in India, all of them had Iranian connection. So it's not just about Argentina, and for these governments definitely to understand it, as long as they will be trying, as opposed, by the way, to the Bulgarian government, that immediately issued the proper information, the proper statements, but those who will be covering up, as we used to say always about the Holocaust, it always starts with the Jews, never ends with the Jews. They will have it the hard way.
So is it part of prepared agreement between America and Iran that there will be no terrorist activity all over the world?
I don't know.
Yeah, well, speaking about does America want to lead or doesn't want to lead? That's the leadership. Okay.
Please, in the back.
I'm Mayor from Congressman Lamborn's office. We're speaking about democratic
Congressman who?
Congressman Lamborn.
Mm-hmm.
We're speaking about the democratic leadership, and democracy loves to speak about values and rights. It seems like Israel is missing the point. You both were leaders on Israel advocacy. Israel seems to be speaking more about security and more about Israel's technology and advancement, and a little bit less about Israel's rights to Israel. Do you think there's a chance that message is being lost, and that possibly that's why the world is having a hard time with Israel's being in the West Bank?
I'm sorry, I didn't really understand the question, but look, we are in the West Bank because of security and not because we want to control the rights of Palestinians. As I always was saying, I want Palestinians to have all the rights which I have. I don't want them to be able to destroy me. And that's very closely connected.
If I could just clarify.
Yeah.
I'm saying, I guess the preliminary question should be, do you believe that the Jewish people have ties and rights to the West Bank? And then, are we not, assuming that we will negotiate on those lands, should we not also speak about our rights to the land, and then from that point start negotiating?
Oh, I'm sorry. I know it's not really nice to quote yourself, but I will say that
Who will quote if not you?
no, I don't have that problem. These days I don't have that problem. Every stupid thing I say immediately makes sense. But I will say that I always started both my political conversations and public appearances in front of any audience by saying that the whole land of Israel belongs to the Jewish people. And definitely, when I said it to the president of South Africa, I was a little bit afraid that very soon the guns with Kalashnikov guns will appear, and this will be my last stupid sentence ever. But I always continued by saying, which is very good news for what you're trying to reach, because last time I checked, you can't negotiate on something that is not yours. If it's yours, you can negotiate. If it's not yours, just run away and hope that they won't persecute you after that. As I do believe that it's all ours, I do recognize that there are other people living there, that have these rights and aspirations, and as Natan said, we want them to have their rights. This is a good start for something. And it doesn't necessarily mean full withdrawal, evacuating all the terrible settlements. This is a very nice theory that brings peace. It was, every theory has the right to exist. In practical terms, it was tried once in the Gaza Strip. All total withdrawal, no settlers, no settlements. The result is well known. So I guess it's a little bit more complicated than that famous formula. But if I understand you correctly, I wouldn't put words into your mouth, but without starting as first thing that we have rights to this area, because otherwise, it's for security. I can't come to your house and say that I need it because someone's going to rob mine, so I'll be sitting in yours watching. It doesn't work like that. So the right is there, the necessity is there, the rest is negotiable.
Please.
So, Natan and Speaker both know me, Jill Smith from the Genesis Prize Foundation. You can see that we have a great turnout of college students here who obviously care deeply about Israel and the issues we're talking about. But I'm sure they're not monolithic in their views and thoughts about Israel. And you say that America is an important partner. We all know that the Jewish community here needs to support Israel to make Israel more viable than ever. How can you, as Speaker of the Knesset and the leader of the Jewish Agency, help us have a better conversation on campuses throughout the country to really make this a constructive conversation so that we can do our best as leaders in the community to support Israel?
Well, you mentioned that you don't have monolithic view. You want to have monolithic view, so you should not be Jewish. Because I don't understand monolithic view. My God, but in the Soviet Union we had monolithic view. We know what happened with the Soviet Union. So I think it is very important with all the variety of opinions and attitudes to life, which we Jewish people always represent. It's very important to find the way to every young man and woman and to show that in values which are important for him or for her, Israel is his family. Because Israel really, if you want tikkun olam, if you want equality of women, if you want gay rights, 10 years ago I discovered with a big surprise that by far the most important time on the campuses, when the time of Second Intifada, I went to all American campuses, what about gay rights? Then what I did after this on my second tour, I took one gay Palestinian who was explaining that for him to survive, he had to ask for political asylum in Jerusalem because in Bethlehem he couldn't survive. So then people start thinking that maybe really it's not so good to be Palestinian in Bethlehem. But seriously speaking, we really have to see what is important for these people, and I am sure there are ways to show it, because Israel is really unique part of the world with a very optimistic message, practical for everyone. The fact that there are so much jamming of this message, that's our problem, and here we cannot do it without your help. Well, AIPAC will meet here in 3 weeks, and that's their challenge.
Well, only to add, I totally agree. I would just add to that I had a great privilege about 3 hours ago to appear a couple miles away from here with Dalai Lama, and you know, you have to be nice to your co-speaker and someone you're sharing the stage with. And I looked through quotes, and one of the first quotes I came across was a quote by a sentence by Dalai Lama saying, "When there is ignorance, no real peace is possible." So he meant something else, I guess, but I think it's very suitable for the answer to your question, because many of these things result in total ignorance. I don't believe that all those who are participating in all these anti-Israel groups, I'm not talking about the hardcore. The hardcore, you know what, my advice to you would be forget it. You can't persuade it. But the innocent students who really think that we are terrible monsters and the poor Palestinians are wonderful people, and you know, they used to have their state for hundreds of years, but then because of the Holocaust, the Europeans wanted to give Jews their homeland, so they came to the Middle East, ruined the Palestinian state, sent the Palestinian government to exile, and I promise you, I guess we have to ask the students, but on many of the campuses I could get away with a lecture like that. So ignorance is our utmost enemy in these things. By educating people, we're going to get rid of all the anti-Israel feelings, but we'll definitely narrow the audience for them in a very serious way.
Thank you.